Hi everyone, Mad Luigi here, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Instead of my normal scripted, deep dive lore video, I'm going to be reviewing and ranking in a tier list the bosses of Elden Ring. Not all of the bosses, as I don't want this to be a 2-hour video, I'm just going to be reviewing and ranking the 15 main bosses of the game, the ones that have remembrances. Even though I have been making lots of Elden Ring videos, I haven't actually been playing the game that much. So I wanted to get back into it a little bit, and I did that with a New Game Plus run of killing all of the main bosses, these remembrances. So while I'm working on other videos like lore and critiques and philosophy of Elden Ring, I thought it would be a fun idea to just do this ranking tier list in the meantime. So I hope you all enjoy watching the video. If you do, make sure to subscribe to the channel as it really helps out, and you can even support me on Patreon if you really like my content. With that said, let's get into the bosses of Elden Ring and my ranking of them. First up is Margit, and as you know, we don't get a remembrance from fighting Margit the first time, but he is still a pretty interesting boss fight. He is the basic introduction to the game in terms of boss fights, because most people play him as the first boss, and I'm not counting the Soldier of Godrick as a meaningful first boss. And so I thought it would be meaningful to rank him and then revisit him once I come back to look at Morgott. So looking at Margit, I think it's a great thematic fight. It's moody, it's interesting, and he's an interesting enemy that leaves the first-time player wondering more when he dies, both for his interesting design and for his dying curse about the hands of the Fell Omen. I think the mechanics are overall solid and they make for a good fight, and the different weapons via magic, tail, and staff add variety. But there are definitely some gamey interplay with the unrealistically long delay in some of his swings, and then the continuous strings of follow-up attacks. If Margit can immediately small dagger sideswipe after a long combo, the player can feel like they don't get a proper punishment opportunity after they've dodged a bunch. While an optimal player can keep pressure up while running away with extra tools like throwing daggers, most players, especially the first time they're playing and the first main boss they're fighting, aren't going to be engaging at a fully optimal level, and so they'll be on the other end of the spectrum, with long periods of delay between engagements with the boss. A lack of posture bar also shrouds the mechanic to the point that many players won't realize it's worth it to keep pressure up in any way they can, like occasionally throwing daggers. The daggers don't really do very much damage, so a player might not see any purpose to it, even though one or two every once in a while in between attacks can make it so you can posture break Margit in a reasonable amount of time. So it's a solid fight, but it does highlight some of the issues that will come to be a problem in a lot of bosses and a lot of the gameplay of Elden Ring. If it was free of kind of the gaminess and excessive amount of delays and speedy attacks, I would be okay with some of them for roll catching. I would put this as S tier, but because it has those issues, I'm going to put the Margit fight as an A tier, maybe S tier fight. Next up is the first fully fledged demigod we meet, Godrick the Grafted. Godrick has an interesting design and silhouette, he has pretty good lore, and a fitting Phase 2 that adds to the Phase 1 with new power-ups. Though he does have a few annoying attacks design-wise. There are long combos, and immediately summoning wind that is only avoidable by staying away. The first time I went through the game, I didn't have much issue with the wind summoning attack, and even playing through again on New Game Plus, I didn't have much issue with it. But the speed with which it comes out is basically impossible to dodge if you're staying close to him, so you have to stay away, which is okay, but then even when I'm attacking Godrick in neutral, if he immediately summons the wind when I'm going in for an attack, I'm punished when it looked like there was an opening, or at least it looked like to me. There's nearly no telegraph for it, so you can get randomly punished when you're going in for an attack or if you're staying close to him, somewhat unfairly. It's not the largest issue, and I think it's an overall decent fight, but it is something that's present. So I will put Godrick in the B tier. He isn't as interesting to me as Margit, but he's a solid fight. I enjoy him, good gameplay, solid stuff. Next up is Rennala, who I think has great design and an intriguing Phase 1 to Phase 2, the first time you play it at least. But subsequent runs, Phase 1 is really just a chore, especially when Rennala has one of the longest boss run backs in the game. They really add to each other and make it pretty annoying to go through. She has a good kit of attacks, the mix of spells, including new moon spells that we've seen for the first time during her fight, and summoning creates a good pressure for the player. It's kind of an easy fight, and I do hear that as criticism, even though the first time I played the game, I think it took me a decent number of tries. But I always feel decently pressured when I'm in the fight, even going through New Game Plus. I feel like she's a good kind of difficulty where none of the moves seem designed to catch a player or manufactured to, oh, I got you when you're rolling because I knew you were going to be doing that timing, because we're used to that in previous games. I think there's just solid pressure, and with Rennala's movements backwards to create space, it feels very natural and very fitting for a mage-like enemy to do that. It's a really just nice mix of all of the different abilities. I feel like this is one of the best examples of a boss feeling very natural, unlike what we saw with Margit and somewhat with Godrick. Because of the benefits, I'm going to choose to put Rennala in the A tier. The boss run back and the phase 1 are pretty detrimental, and so maybe I should be giving those more credit and putting her in B tier, but I think it's just, I had a really good time with the fight the last time I went through it, and I thought it was a good experience, so I'm going to go with A tier. Now we might start getting controversial with my opinion on Radahn. I'm pretty sure Radahn was the winner of favorite boss when I did the circuit polling in my community. So, my criticism of him might sound a bit much. I do think the fight thematically and everything building up to it, the festival, I think it all creates a grand spectacle, especially with his lore and fighting him in a giant sand dune arena that's its whole own world, basically. Now, I really think that part of that spectacle is fighting Radahn with all of the summons. With it being a war festival and the dialogue we get afterwards, it really reads to me that the game is pushing and promoting fighting Radahn with all of the summons. It's the only fight in the game, and I think any FromSoft game that I've played, where we have that aspect of tons and tons of summons in the boss arena and able to be resummoned when they die. However, when we fight Radahn in this way, it really turns into a gimmick fight. Fighting him with so many people and attacking so once in a while and his AI jumping between multiple people kind of turns it into a gimmick fight where you're not engaging in the same way as you would in a normal 1v1 boss fight or in most of the boss fights of FromSoft's design. It's really because there's no special AI for Radahn to account for the multiple targets and enemies. I think this is a broader issue with the game and the emphasis on summons, but it really leads to issue if you're trying to treat the fight as methodical. Especially because this can lead to erratic hits if you are too close to Radahn on foot when there are other NPCs around. It's hard to predict what attack he's going to do or where it's going to go when it's swapping between different targets. Now, when you're using the summoning, it really pushes you to use the horse to kind of avoid this, but that limits your engagement with Radahn because you're hitting him less frequently, you're going in less often, and it leads to the player often sitting back. You can 1v1 him, you can always choose to do that, but the giant figure of Radahn, plus bad camera angles, and awkwardness of occasionally needing torrent but generally having to stay on foot to dodge attacks, all gets in the way of what is sometimes a really fun one-on-one. This could be helped if torrent had more combat capabilities, or some iframes on dashes, or just something to give torrent more tools to deal with Radahn. And this could help the fight whether it's 1v1 or with summons. Having torrent be able to do more could make it more interactive, because when Radahn is on his horse all the time, you want to match him on the horse. Overall for the fight, either as a gimmick or an unclean one-on-one, I think it could have been better with more fleshed out torrent options, and maybe trying to choose more between one option or the other, gimmick or 1v1. I appreciate the ability to choose, and I do find beneficial aspects in both, but the issues do get in the way for me to really experience this as a fun and enjoyable fight. Because of the issues, I'm going to put Radahn at B tier, even though I would probably say he's better than Godrick. Part of the reason I'm doing this tier list is because I don't want to say specifically this boss is better than this boss is better than this boss. I don't want to make a one-to-one list because there would be too many considerations to do as casually as right now. I'm sure if I really sat down, maybe I could. But I would say Radahn is better than Godrick, but I enjoy the Margit and the Rennala fights more than I do Radahn almost any time I fight him. Next up is going to be the last candidate for Great Rune before you get into Elendel, and that is Rykard. Rykard probably has one of, if not the best environment setting and thematics for his boss fight. Volcano Manor is a great intro area to prepare you for the fight, but you're still surprised by what you find. You see the snakes, you see the lava, you get prepared in theme for it, but when you find this giant god-devouring serpent, it's a really interesting and just thrilling experience. I really enjoyed it. Rykard's voice actor is obviously fantastic, but when I was first going through the game, I think Rykard was my favorite boss up to that point, and he held on pretty well throughout the rest of the game. Now, it is a gimmick fight, obviously, and it can be a bit reductive mechanically due to spamming the weapon art being probably the best thing you can do. But my first playthrough, I felt like I had a natural use of the kit, of all the different attacks that the Serpent Hunter, I think is the name of the weapon, can use. Even if I now recognize that I was playing suboptimally by not spamming L2 repeatedly for the entire fight. I think Rykard has a good kit of diverse, cool attacks, though the ground lava was something I was never able to learn how to dodge. I would try outrunning, I would try dodging at the right time. Maybe it's just a flaw of me still having the timings wrong despite playing through him a couple times, but it's now still an issue I haven't gotten over even though I've been able to deal with the rest of his kit. Maybe some more variation in the snake attacks would make for a better experience for phase 1. Like you could have things falling from the ceiling because there's all the destruction that's going on with the pillars, or there could be a rumbling earthquake you can jump over. Maybe the ground lava kind of acts like that. I think it would be interesting to have an AoE going out from Rykard that's basically like a jump over earthquake. And let me know if there is some attack like that that I'm forgetting or didn't run into in New Game Plus and just completely forgot it. So I think there are some faults with this fight. After all, it is a gimmick fight that really pushes you to use the boss weapon, but I think it's a fantastically done gimmick boss and one of the coolest action set pieces that we get in the game. And it still somewhat stays true to the Souls-like gameplay, since you are still interacting in a similar methodical way of dodging and waiting for an opening to attack, even though it's a modified gimmick version. I think something like this is what they wanted to do but failed with Yorm, and I think it's just really successful. So Rykard is going to be my first S tier of the tier list, which is unsurprising because I said he was my favorite in the game when I first started. Next up, we have another maybe controversial opinion, the Regal Ancestral Spirit. I love this boss. It has amazing scenery and atmosphere. It has outstanding music. The soundtrack is my favorite out of probably any song in the game. I think it's the best in the game. Everything in here feels otherworldly, which is very fitting for the setting of the boss, a kind of old, natural being that was forgotten by the Order and the world, and it exists pretty secluded from all of them. It's underground, and even then it's separated from the Nox and the Eternal Cities. It's its own thing, and the boss setting and arena really match that vibe. It could use a bit more of a power-up in Phase 2, and it does suffer from being a bit too easy. My first time playing through the game, I was sad that the spirit died so quickly because I wanted to have the fight extend and go on longer. So it could do with a kit with a few more options for pressure, maybe like making the smaller creature spirits in the arena attack you, or by using spirit projectiles other than fire. Some sort of utilization of old power would be pretty cool. Overall, this is one of, if not my favorite fight in the game, so it is unquestionably for me an S tier boss. It is probably my favorite boss still. The music is probably going a really long way in that because I just absolutely love the soundtrack, but I do just really enjoy the Ancestor Spirit fight. And if more of the fights in Elden Ring were more like it, I don't know specifically in which way, but if they just captured the same kind of energy that I get from this fight, I think I would have been happier with the bosses in the game. And before we get to Leyndell, we have one more underground boss, and that's Astel. Astel is thematically very strong, a stolen night sky in an underground cave, plus being at the end of Ranni's questline. It would have more of an impact if we never saw any of the gray mini Astels, and the first time we saw this Astel, we were left completely surprised by the form and the design and the otherworldly alien planetness. I think that would have hit home a little bit more. It's not too big of an issue because even my first playthrough, I saw those gray Astels because they were so monotone and always kind of on the side or on the edge. You're running away from them, they're hanging from the ceiling, they're not like the main focus like you're fighting them. So it's not the biggest issue, but it is something that could have helped with the impact. Astel's attacks have an okay variety, but it did feel like he often spammed down slam against me. There are lots of AoE attacks that make for lots of running away, run back in, repeat. So I thought the mechanics were not horribly engaging, but the setting is very cool and it's a decent fight. So while the setting is impressive, the fight itself just doesn't get that much out of me. It's not a bad fight, but it's not that good of one either in my opinion. So for these reasons, I'm going to put Astel at B tier. Astel doesn't reach the same heights or the same glaring issues as Radahn. So maybe it's more like Godrick in that it's pretty good. It's nothing super great or bad either way. The setting for Astel is really fantastic, but I'm basically just repeating myself at this point. The fight itself didn't have enough to pull me to bring it up to Margit or Rennala. And speaking of Margit, now that we beat Astel, we are going to Leyndell, where we fight against the proper form of Margit, which is Morgott. And I don't actually know if I like Morgott better than Margit in terms of a fight. Morgott is an upgraded Margit with a more proper phase 2, more variety, more weapons, and it seems like more annoying delays and long chains of attack. Morgott is a solid fight and one of the most vanilla in the game when it comes to presentation and thematics. It's an arena, it's pretty simple colors, it's just the city of Leyndell. It is golden, it is at the foot of the Erd Tree, but it is pretty straightforward in just a 1v1 in a square arena with some chairs. It's simple, but it works for a nice semi-humanoid 1v1. If not for the small issues of the kind of over-engineering and unrealistic delays, I think the flow and the dance of Morgott would be more easily achievable, and I think that would make him an S tier fight. As it is now, maybe some can get into that flow state easily, but I only get glimpses of it when I fight him. So I'm going to say that he remains in the A tier. He's a good fight, but there are issues that prevent me from really just sinking my teeth into it and having fun. And one of the issues that has come up here in Margit and will come up later that I have with the kind of delays is they do serve a mechanical purpose in that they can change up timing and make it so that the player has to think about the rolling, not panic roll. It can roll catch, but there is an issue to it that takes me out of my immersion, out of the feeling like I'm in the game. And it's when a character is charging up an attack and doing an overhead swing and just sitting there with it, they're basically leaving themselves open to attack. At least they are if I'm actually in game. But because this is a game, it's not a large opening, it's just a way to delay to catch the player when they're rolling. With Margit, Morgott, and I think Radahn is a really good example, you can attack them when they're charging up these attacks, but you never really delay them, you never posture break them during these attacks, and that leads to a feeling of it's not really an opening even when it looks like it is one. And yeah, looks can be deceiving and whatnot, yes, but for me it feels like it kind of takes me out of the game by highlighting the fact that it is a game. Like it feels very gamey and that kind of hurts my immersion. So that's just a kind of description of the issue I'm having with the bosses when I'm talking about that kind of delay and one of the reasons why it negatively impacts my gameplay a bit. Next up we have a boss below Leyndell, and that is Lichdragon Fortisax. I don't know if it's Lichdragon or Lichdragon. I never played D&D or anything that actually had a Lich or Lich, whatever the weird skeleton overlord is, so I don't know how to pronounce it. This boss has killer visuals paired with a killer soundtrack where an organ goes so hard it sounds a bit like electric rock music to me. The dual lightning effects really make for an intimidating and electric feel, especially with the vibe of the music that I just mentioned. I think the attack kit has alright diversity, if a bit repetitive with dragon attacks of lightning slams, and the constant tracking shock does add pressure, but in a bit of an annoying way. The Deathblight never presented too much concern to me, so maybe adding another Deathblight attack or changing up the area it's in so it's a little bit more pressure on the player. Maybe it's tighter AoE, but it's more close to the dragon. That would maybe make for a better fight. There were significant camera issues which made me unable to appreciate what I'm sure were stunning aerial movements and attacks. I would have liked to see Fortisax going up to the air and coming down in all their dragon glory, but I just couldn't see it because the camera wouldn't let me look up, the tracking was an issue. This is an issue FromSoft has with a lot of the big bosses in Elden Ring, and it's really apparent in this fight. Because of this, dodging the attacks also became somewhat of a guessing game. It was never too difficult to do, but it was just an issue. And I also heard concerns of low health, which I kind of remember from my first playthrough, but I haven't fought in New Game in a while. Going back recently, I fought him on New Game Plus, and he had pretty okay health. The boss fight has a lot going for it, and the presentation is great, but the issues do add up. So I'm going to put Fortisax in B or A tier, and thinking about it, I think the presentation and just the coolness factor, with the fight being pretty decent, I think that'll put it into A tier for me. I don't have as much issues as I have with Radahn, and I think it is distinctly better than Astel and Godrick. I had a better time with it. Next up is a boss I did not have a better time with, and that is the Fire Giant, which is an intriguing enemy by design. It's the last of the Fire Giants, and it's a mighty Torrent fight. I like utilizing Torrent in a fight, and it feels like this is a fitting fight to do so, but Torrent doesn't have many mechanics, so it's not that great of an addition. And the mechanics for the fight, I feel like, are pretty meh. The camera is on his feet the whole time, and most attacks aren't visible from where you can attack the giant. You can't see most of his attacks when you're attacking him because you're so close and the camera is so close. You can see his foot stomps, but that's about it. Didn't make too much of an issue in terms of difficulty for me. It never felt like a horribly difficult fight, but overall the fight is pretty lackluster. It's not terrible. It's not that this is an absolutely terrible fight. I think it's somewhat well made in the sense that most of the stuff in the game, this fight included, are made to a certain level of professionality, and that makes sense since FromSoft has kind of been honing this design of game for many years. Nothing is absolutely terrible or mind-boggling or takes me completely out and it's like, this is an atrocious game. But when I'm rating the fights, this is one of the worst ones. It's one of the most meh fights in the game mechanically to me, and because of that, I have to rank it pretty lowly. I think it will be my first D tier because it's really bad. It's not fun. I might make it C tier when we get to the Elden Beast. It might be unquestionable that that is much farther below. So for now, actually, I'll bring him up to C tier. The Fire Giant, he's not atrocious. He's not terrible. He's just very unengaging to me. Not very fun. I don't look forward to him. So next up after the Fire Giant, we get to go to Farum Azula and fight Maliketh. Maliketh has a nice progression from Grank in Phase 1 to Maliketh in Phase 2. But there are lots of annoying attacks and Margit-esque timings. There are a few delays, and the Phase 1 dagger slash is too quick in my opinion. You have to avoid being too close to him or get lucky and not get hit by it. Oftentimes there feels like there's no opening to punish in Phase 2, and maybe I should qualify that I recently played with a greatsword, so the punish windows do have to be longer for me, but generally doing a roll attack or a jump attack in the openings there are still leaves me open to get damage, and I have to basically trade damage, or that's what it feels like when I'm fighting. I know there are people, of course, in every one of these games that can fight every boss no hit, so there are openings, but from my level of play, which I think is pretty decent, I'm not a terrible player, these issues really pop up. As I said, there might be openings on completely optimal play, but for my first playthrough, and what seems to be common sentiment, and when I was even playing on this recent New Game Plus, is that there aren't many openings if you aren't playing at that optimal level. It ends up with Phase 2 having quite long lulls where you basically just dodge for a long time waiting to get one hit in. I think there's not enough use of the Blasphemous Claw for a game that does emphasize a little bit more of the RPG elements over the action, at least relative to my feeling on previous From games. You don't get a lot of use out of the Blasphemous Claw because there really aren't many attacks that Maliketh uses where you can use the claw. I've done many runs where I feel like I haven't seen a single golden attack that I can use the Blasphemous Claw on, or I'm just missing attacks that do have an opening for the claw's use. And I think this point is especially strong because a successful parry with the claw doesn't even give a visceral attack or riposte option. It just kind of turns Maliketh into kind of a woozy state who can be hit by a few more attacks, but he can also attack a little bit during it. So if it's not even going to give us a riposte option, there should be more opportunities to use the claw. A dance with Maliketh could be a nice flow, but it feels like there are too many juts getting in the way of that flow. For these reasons, I'm going to put Maliketh in C tier. He is more engaging than the Fire Giant, but he has more significant issues to him as well. After Maliketh, we come back to Leyndell covered in ash, and we fight Hoarah Loux, Warrior. He has a compelling presentation for a very built-up figure, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, and his Phase 2 is a nice flip on the standard Golden Order role. It's not something to super expect, and it's an interesting change in the presentation and the fighting style. Phase 1 is solid, and Phase 2 does introduce some of the annoying delays or super speedy grabs or zooms, kind of one or the other, just really trying to catch the player's typical timing to say, ha, gotcha. And to some degree what I said before, it's annoying because it's playing against the timings that a player would expect, not just from previously playing the games, but also from the visual cues of the movements of Hoarah Loux. The animations feel like he's going to become at a certain timing, and then he comes at a different, whether faster or slower. And you could say this adds variety or it adds difficulty, but it just feels like not the kind of difficulty that feels really good to me. You do have to learn the timings, which is a staple of like FromSoft fights. It's always a timing game, but it's done in a way that, for lack of a better phrase, rubs me the wrong way. It just doesn't feel great with the animations that I'm seeing. And I could get more into detail in a more dedicated critique, which I'm sure I'll do sometime in the future. Maybe not Hoarah Loux specifically, but the bosses in general, and I will look at a few specifics. But Phase 2 is still pretty fun. You would expect a lot of pressure from the warrior constantly pressing you, but the mechanical execution of it is just a little lackluster. It's kind of meh also to have AoE attacks that cover nearly the whole arena. If I'm so far away that I can barely see Hoarah Loux, I would think the attacks should dissipate a bit, but it feels like I can be 90% across the arena and it's still getting me. Not as a very technical description. I don't know how much it actually covers of the arena. That's the feeling I got when playing, and if I was very far away, I still had to dodge just the same as if I was very close up. And I can adjust my playstyle for that, but it just feels kind of odd with what I'm seeing in the game. It feels gamey and kind of taking me out of it. So with all of that said, I'm going to put Hoarah Loux in, I would put him in either the B or the A tier. I do think he's pretty good. He does have some issues. Do I think he's better than Astel, Radahn, and Godrick? Do I think he's as good as Rennala, Lichdragon, and Morgott? I don't know. I would put him in B/A if I could, but I don't have that tier. So, I know my first time playing through the game, I really didn't like him, but I was also trying to beat the game pretty quickly, and he was frustrating because I wanted to make videos about the game. So, we're going to put him in... I'll put him in B tier for now. I didn't really enjoy him at all until recently. Alright for now, and maybe if I'm feeling gracious later, we'll move him up to A, we'll see. So gameplay-wise, this could be after Hoarah Loux, and it could be after the Elden Beast as well, but I'm pretty sure I fought him actually earlier, so now we're going to be looking at Dragonlord Placidusax. Dragonlord Placidusax has a great arena for a thematic fight. There's a good range of attacks. I think Phase 2 would probably be cooler with more flying and less teleporting. The teleporting is interesting, but seeing Placidusax fly around the stage would be even cooler. Add in more of the shrouded cloud, red lightning in the clouds effects, and I think it would just be even greater. It's already really good right now. It's a great effect, very interesting. I really enjoy the fight. And there could also be some other aspect that would capitalize on the grandiosity of it. Maybe something a la Divine Dragon from Sekiro. That fight was more of a gimmick, but adding something in a little bit like that one into this fight could not make it a gimmick, just elevate the greatness of the feeling of the fight because it's such a grandiose fight already. It is a really enjoyable fight. There aren't any significant issues I have with it. It's a solid fight. It's dramatic. Just a little bit more thematic pumping in the gameplay, and I think it could have been an S tier, but because it doesn't super grab my fancy, I'll put it in A tier. It's a really solid fight. It's just enjoyable, and maybe I would give it S tier if it didn't have a terrible boss run back. Yes, makes sense that there's no Statue of America, I guess, because it's out of time and space, but it's just, I hate boss runbacks. I made a video previously about how boss runbacks are a terrible aspect of the game. They are maybe a necessary aspect for invading, but now invading doesn't even happen to solo players unless you use Taunting Tongue, so I guess that argument wasn't very strong. I really hate boss runbacks, and it's annoying. It's surprising I give two of the bosses with the worst boss runbacks are A tier for me. Rennala probably wouldn't be S tier without the boss runback. She would need more to get to S tier. Placidusax could maybe make an argument. I really don't like the boss runback though, especially the first time I was playing the game. So that'll be where that is. And next up, I'm going to do Mohg because he's pretty late game for me. I fought him after I beat the game generally, but he not as oomphy to me. So we're gonna review him next. Mohg has a really good build-up. Mohgwyn Palace as an arena is really well done. I really like it as a optional extra area. I think if more of the end game was kind of like that, it was a little bit more condensed and kind of focused, it would have been a better experience. If it was just all a bit shorter and a bit focused, I think it would have been great. So I like Mohg's build-up arena in terms of thematics, in terms of gameplay. It's all a good setup. And his phase 1 is okay, but there are definitely the annoying delays, which to me break immersion. And there's like the really long wait for an overhead swing. But as a player, I can't punish the opening. It feels gamey in a bad way. I can't have a mini poise break at all. I can't interrupt it. Or maybe I can, but with my greatsword, I'm just not doing enough. I would say with this build, if this build isn't interrupting it, then most builds aren't going to. In terms of discussing if you meaningfully can do it, I would say no. It feels like there's an opening. There should be. Visually there is, and there isn't an opening in the way that I would want out of it. Maybe you can get a slight attack in during the delay, but it's not enough given how big of an opening there feels like there is. Phase 2 could be a good upgrade to Phase 1. A lot of the attacks are newly imbued with Blood Flame. It's a good classic way to do a Phase 2, but it does really become a spam fest with flame randomly strewn on the ground. The flame seems to end up in the arena with random damage zones that doesn't give any rhyme or reason to certain areas having damage because it's just wherever Mohg is shooting them. And this is unlike dedicated area damage that make for intentional obstacles, and I think those are generally better to spew the boss arena with. Kind of like Morgott's Golden Raining Sword attack, I think that's a better way of adding pressure and putting obstacles for the player other than just spewing fire around. It just feels like it gets in the way and it's not super engaging because it can just stack up randomly and then, oh, I have to just stand in this little corner. It's just not the most well done or engaging for me. Maybe that could be a matter of taste as opposed to design, but I would say design wise, I think something a little bit closer, even if it could still somewhat be random, to something like Morgott's Raining Sword attack is a better experience, a better design. Also, Mohg flying away a bunch doesn't help for the fight. Maybe I liked him more on my first playthrough, and maybe in New Game he's better than New Game Plus, but with a recent New Game Plus fight, he just felt more ugh than good flow. I didn't enjoy the fight, so I'm going to be putting Mohg in C tier. There isn't anything pulling me, there's a good theme, good setting, but he's not super engaging. Maybe if I try another run with a different build, I'll feel more variety on it, but I've played with different builds in the game. My first playthrough, I had a couple different builds, and those were all different than my current mainly strength build for New Game Plus. So, I don't know, Mohg just isn't doing it for me. Next up, we're going to look at the final boss of the game, the Elden Beast. At least the Elden Beast is what is shown on the Remembrance, but as we obviously know, it is a Phase 1, Phase 2 fight, where the Phase 1 is very different than the Phase 2, the Phase 1 being Radahn, the Phase 2 being the Elden Beast. I think Radahn on his own would probably get an A tier for me. He has an interesting design and a fun kit to fight against in a 1v1. It's a pretty fitting 1v1 final boss fight. I think it's just a solid 1v1. There's a little bit of delaying attacks and you can attack him during those, but for the most part it feels like a comfortable dance. Could do with less teleporting in his second mini phase. Maybe that's a thing I have with teleporting. I would like a little bit less of it, but overall pretty solid. I like the Radahn fight. It's not quite as good as Soul of Cinder. The Soul of Cinder is, in my opinion, the one-on-one in one of the best ways. I think Gale is also that one-on-one in a really outstanding way from Dark Souls 3, but Radahn is solid. However, the Elden Beast is not. The infamous Elden Beast. The Elden Beast is terrible. It takes the cake for actions which don't let the player engage or fight. So if I have an issue with Radahn teleporting away, I have 10 times as much of an issue with the Elden Beast being terrible. The Elden Beast is unquestionably, for me, the worst boss in the game in terms of mechanics, or at least the worst Remembrance, since there could be a couple small little tiny bosses that are really terrible. It has okay attacks in general, but pair Elden Stars with its infinite runaway and a lack of torrent in the boss fight, it's basically irredeemable in my eyes, regardless of its interesting setting. I think it does have a decent setting. I think the area it teleports you to is very cool, very alien. Everything comes out of left field in a way that I would think would be better if there was just a little bit more evidence or foreshadowing or just a little hint of something to prepare for it. It's just really random teleportation away to this new Greater Will Golden Tree area. Like, I think Bloodborne did the Moon Presence better, and obviously the Moon Presence is a better fight. So with all of those things, the Elden Beast, I don't know if I could just average them and put them somewhere in the middle because I like Radahn and I don't like the Elden Beast. But because the Remembrance is the Elden Remembrance and it's basically just for the Beast, I'm going to have to put it in D tier. The Elden Beast is terrible. I hate it. Irredeemable. Yeah, it's just a bad time. I don't like it. Like, I don't think it's mechanically well, and I think you can like it, you can enjoy it, you can enjoy the spectacle, and maybe you can even be okay with the fight, that's fine, but I think from a design point of view, trying to be objective, it's just not great. It's just not good. It's just bad. It is bad. Elden Stars and the running away is just, I don't know how there's a defense of those as design options. If anybody in the comments wants to disagree and defend Elden Stars and running away to me, please feel free to do so from the point of view of just like good design, because to me it's not engaging, it's unavoidable damage, it's just not what I want from a game, especially a FromSoft game. And especially the ultimate, the final fight of the game. This is the final boss. It's a complete letdown. It's terrible. And lastly, we have Malenia, who you all should know I pronounced Malenia in, I think, my Outer Gods video, and I still get tons of comments about how I say Malenia. Yes, she says her name after she dies. I probably misspelled it. I probably switched the A and the E in the script, so I said Malenia, not Malenia. I'm sorry for the offense. I got back at all the people well enough with my Malenia lore video. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. You'll see what I mean pretty quickly. But let's talk about her as a boss fight, since I unfortunately don't have that much good to say. I can say it has a good phase 1 to phase 2 transition. It is a pretty quintessential use of the technique of phase 2 being a revamped version with the elemental damage, the more special effects, more longer range explosions on it. Kind of similar to Gale, maybe just because they have a similar color in their special attacks. But whereas Gale I think is a good fight, Malenia I don't think is a good fight. Phase 2 is more fun to me than phase 1, but I really hardly got to play it, even though I beat Malenia. The boss fight is very difficult, as everybody will agree, but to the part that people might not agree about, I think it's unfortunately difficult in many bad ways. The hyper armor she has on a lot of attacks makes it feel like I, as a player, don't have as much weight behind my attacks, especially when she's so staggerable outside of these specific attacks which get hyper armor. Having a bit more balance here where she doesn't stagger quite as much in general, and she has less hyper armor, or even just leaving more hyper armor for phase 2 would have been better in my opinion. Phase 2 we already have a small amount of openings, so it wouldn't be a big deal for her to have hyper armor during a good amount of the attacks, because we're already avoiding them, so it's just kind of adds to the severity in which we have to avoid them. Saving that for phase 2 could have had a little bit more balance. You lower the difficulty of phase 1 a little bit, but maybe you could even amp it up a little bit more in phase 2. Maybe other people had different experiences, but I had a lot more time spent on phase 1 than on phase 2. There's also lots of rapid recovery and small punish windows, especially after Waterfowl, which makes it so that the player isn't rewarded with engagement as much after dodging a really long attack string. It's just continuing and elongating the time that we have to wait as players. And of course, there is Waterfowl Dance, which is an utterly terrible move that is nearly impossible to dodge. If you don't want to abuse Bloodhound Step, then you have to either play extremely passively or get lucky if you don't want to have your day ruined by Waterfowl. It covers so much ground, it functions like a small AoE, and can come out at blazingly fast speeds. All of these things leave the player in a poor position to deal with it. I would much rather have a flurry of precise attacks that are more apt for dodging than something which almost demands significant running away, along with dodging, along with you're probably still going to get hit unless you do it perfectly. And this is all on top of the other issues with Waterfowl Dance being able to come out so fast. It can come out immediately after you attack her or she stops another attack, so your positioning for it can kind of unfairly be punished, and even Waterfowl has a very small punish window after it. If you have a good dodge, you can set it up well to attack her, but sometimes my slower swings were completely not able to punish. And after such a significant attack, arguably the most difficult attack to dodge or to play around in the entire game, you would expect a significant window to punish or the player then attack Malenia, but it just isn't the case. She just keeps on going with her kit. She is basically a Sekiro boss. With more polish, she could have been an outstanding fight with a similar level of difficulty that she has now. I don't think the difficulty is inherently an issue. Obviously, there's plenty of difficulty in these games, and that's part of what we want, and she's an optional endgame boss. A perfect example for the most difficult thing FromSoft is going to put in the game, and that's okay. It's just that so much of the hardness right now comes from things and aspects that don't feel great to fight against. They really just, it's not a good difficulty to me because so many of the things that make it an issue are just frustrating. I like that she dodges. I don't like that if I clip her during a dodge, there's no posture impact and she keeps bulldozing through to do whatever she wants to do. I'm okay missing her at the initial, but if my attack tracking still catches her when she's in her dodge, I feel like there should be some form of interrupt or some respect for me still landing that attack, since sometimes she dodges and I completely miss. But if I dodge an attack from a boss and they track me and they hit me during the dodge when I don't have iframes or at the end of it because they have better tracking than the player has, we are punished for that. And generally that's okay, we just need to dodge differently. The same should apply to Malenia. This is a one-on-one fight. We're at a similar standing. She is a grand warrior, yes, but we've killed everything in the game. So asking to have an impact when we clip her when she's dodging feels like okay to me. That feels like an okay as, but it isn't there, and it makes the fight just be more frustrating. There's also not allowing certain attacks or kinds of damage to send her to phase 2, which can lead to her having a health bar with no health. It's literally on 0, but because she hasn't been hit again and because she was sent to that 0 health with the wrong kind of attack, whether that be a visceral or I'm not sure which specific things cause it, maybe just a visceral, I don't know. This is an issue. It breaks the immersion. It's not like the biggest deal, like this thing by itself, but it's something that just feels emblematic of how there are lots of like small things that make for a very annoying or frustrating aspect of the fight. So you just need to land another hit in this case to send her to phase 2. It's a lot of small things where it's like, oh well, you need to do that, and you need to also do that, and oh yeah, you have to do that. Oh, you do. Oh no, you don't get to do that. There are a lot of things that they're part of the reason why Malenia is so hard, but it's hard in the wrong way. At least that's the best way I would say it without getting into a longer deep dive on Malenia. And unless it's been patched, how even according to the rules of the game, there are things she breaks which are, it's basically just literally unfair. I can't speak on that more so right now. If I do a critique video, I'm sure I'll speak on that more so, how she doesn't respect the mechanics that the game lays out. But I don't know if that's still the case or if it's been patched. If anybody knows, feel free to say so in the comments. And there was a video series by another creator that I will link to in the description if I can find it, which highlighted how she kind of breaks the mechanical rules of the game. Overall, I just don't have that much fun fighting against Malenia. Because there are good aspects to her, I like her more than the Elden Beast. I'm going to put her in C tier. And with that, my distribution of bosses is pretty oddly good. It would just be better if I put this one right here, then it would be a perfect normal distribution. But that is my ranking. That is my tier list of the remembrances of Elden Ring. Nothing about this is too set in stone or concrete. I'm sure these change over time. And my critique and my discussion of these bosses, because this is so free flowing, because I'm not codifying my thoughts as rigidly, don't take this as like horribly strong gospel, but it's just currently where I'm at with the bosses. And when I develop into a critique of the game, I will spend more time specifically talking about intricacies and defending my points of view more so. But I didn't feel the need completely to do so right now because I'm not judging them solely based on favoriteness, though my top 2 bosses are 2 of my favorite bosses. In terms of favoriteness, Rennala might be a little lower. Margit, Morgott might be S tier, and if I was just going off of favoriteness or purely enjoyability, but I tried to have a mix of enjoyability and just what I think of the quality of the bosses. I think Maliketh and I think Malenia aren't that good of bosses. They have better aspects than the Fire Giant, similar to how Radahn has better aspects than some of the other B tiers, but they also have greater failings, which kind of averages out, so to say. So this is where I'm at. I think I'm happy to end the video with these rankings. Mohg, maybe I could stretch to B. Morgott, I don't know if I would stretch him to S. I don't know if there are any others I would put in S. I did enjoy the dragons. Maybe if I had a really good experience run and flow state in one of the bosses, it would be in like an S tier experience. But so many of the bosses have things that I feel like get in the way of me entering a flow state or me entering a nice dance with the boss, just in ways that I'm not super happy with. Like I think the Abyss Watchers is a good example of a boss that doesn't have these issues. There are multiple enemies and it just does it in a really good way where like the multiple enemies, you eventually get an Abyss Watcher that helps fight with you to fight against the multiple Abyss Watcher enemies, and just the flow of the kit just feels really good to me, even though that's a boss that took me like 35 tries my first time playing through Dark Souls 3. Like that would be a boss I'd probably put as S tier, but I think that'll do it. Feel free to do your own tier list and share with me your thoughts on mine, on the rankings, the pros and cons of the bosses, whether or not you think this is I would say fair and balanced list, but obviously taste is going to be a large part of even trying to be objective, even trying to rank the bosses according to best design. That's going to be a lot of taste. So this is probably going to be a long video because the recording is at 1 hour and 10 minutes. It's not going to be that long, but if you've watched this whole thing, I appreciate you watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content. Probably not a lot of more stuff like this, but I will be doing some critique, some analysis, and of course I will be doing much more lore because yeah, there's a lot of lore to discuss, and that's what a lot of my channel is currently. So feel free to subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this. Feel free to support me on Patreon. Thank you very much to my patrons. I probably will put this up before in the video, so I will be late in acknowledging the patron aspect on the screen, but thank you to my patrons. And if you want to support the channel, if you want to help me just dedicate more time and effort to these videos, becoming a patron on Patreon is the best way to do that. So that does it for the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.